Cannabis sativa, or hemp. For 50 years, hemp has been categorized as an illicit drug, but it was once one of the world's largest agricultural crops. Last century, hemp fiber was a major source of paper, cloth, and rope. The seed provided food and oil for lighting. The flowering tops were an important source of medicine. Today, a new strain of hemp with no drug content has the potential to reinstate cannabis in mainstream agriculture. It could help reverse the planet's environmental degradation. But hemp, even the non-drug variety, remains illegal throughout most of the world.
Discovered in Florida with marijuana plants scattered over a
Mudgee has become Australia's new marijuana capital.
The biggest marijuana crops was discovered after a tip of
$150 million worth of cannabis.
Burning the crop,
destroying the plants and spraying to prevent regrowth.
This is the story of hemp's renaissance and the untold history of marijuana. How did it become demonized? Has the drug hysteria blinded us to the myriad uses of this plant? In our zeal to prohibit cannabis, are we denying ourselves a legitimate billion-dollar crop?
Cannabis has not been responsible for a single drug death in Australia or in the world as far as we're informed. Alcohol is responsible for a lot of deaths in this country, both from the acute effects of intoxication and the longer effects of toxicity. Why they're treated so very differently from being promoted in the electronic media and all the rest to being demonised and prohibited. People have to ask that question themselves.
Dr. Andrew Catalaris is a registrar in forensic medicine, but his part-time crusade has been to restore the status of a plant the world has been trying to eradicate for most of this century.
It's entirely hypocritical that cannabis is not available to treat a multitude of human problems, such as the wasting disease associated with HIV. Hemp drugs should be available to all those who may benefit and who need them.
There's thousands of acres in depressed rural areas just crying out for a high value-added crop, and I think hemp is the ideal crop. I really do think it could rejuvenate rural Australia and Australia as a whole.
Andrew's conviction is shared by a number of farmers who are looking seriously at the viability of growing hemp as an alternative crop to cotton.
We think that's a good opportunity to introduce rural employment and export dollars as well.
Yeah, well, the phobia and inhibitions that people have got about marijuana can be put aside, or the recognition that this is not a drug-related crop. Once it achieves respectability, it'll be all systems go, I'm sure.
The drug content of hemp is found only in the leaves and flowering heads. Much work has been done in Europe to breed varieties with very low levels of the psychoactive chemical tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC. It's these strains which are forging hemp's return into mainstream agriculture. These plants might look like other cannabis plants, but you could smoke an entire field and get nothing more than a headache. But the law does not differentiate between varieties, and even non-drug strains are still prohibited, despite their huge industrial potential.
The usefulness of hemp comes from the long, strong fibre which is found on the outside of the plant. It's the strongest of all natural fibres, and that's what's used for the fabric. It's also used for the more traditional uses of ropes and twines, and it can be used in the manufacture of best quality paper. The short fibre in the inside of the plant, the hurd, is composed of about 77% cellulose, and it can be used in the production of alcoholic fuels, such as ethanol, to run our vehicles in a non-polluting way. It can be used as a base for biodegradable plastics, such as cellophane and other more recent biodegradable plastic based on cellulose. It's an extremely useful plant.
Hemp has served mankind for over 12,000 years and was once one of the world's most traded commodities. In the early American colony, hemp was such an important crop, farmers were directed to grow the plant. It was legal tender and could be used to pay taxes. In England, Queen Victoria took cannabis extract to relieve her premenstrual tension. For centuries, the canvas sails and rigging of the world's ships were made from hemp. Van Gogh, like most artists, painted on hemp canvas. The original Levi jeans were made from hemp, even the US flag. Today, in the state of Tasmania, Patsy Harmsen and her husband Fritz are working to revive hemp's forgotten uses. Their Hemp for Paper Consortium is one of the few organizations in the world legally permitted to grow cannabis.
The way that we're doing things is very primitive and tailored purely to a trial crop. People watching us do this would just probably throw up their hands in horror. And in fact, it is about as low-tech and close to nature and human foibles as you could get.
Patsy's research crop is the only legal cannabis under cultivation in Australia. Despite being a non-drug variety, the Harmsens have been restricted to a plot little larger than a tennis court. Although Patsy's made great progress, her ambitions for hemp as a major source of paper have been hindered by a nervous state government.
I've been very frustrated with the delays and the fact that it's tied us up and prevented us from going ahead at the pace that we think is needed, because we think the sooner we start reducing the pressure on the forests, the better. We have small business interest, we have big business interest. Even though it's not a firm commitment, there is certainly a call on the part of big industry for the research to continue. So it is very surprising that the government and the officials concerned saw fit to make it almost impossible for us to go ahead this time.
While Patsy and Fritz have been battling bureaucratic obstacles in Australia, hemp growers in the UK have been enjoying the full support of the British Home Office. After just one research crop, a commercial harvest totaling 1,500 acres of a non-drug variety was licensed to some 30 growers in the south of England. The first legal cannabis to be grown in the British Isles for almost 50 years. The story started here at Harlow Agricultural Merchants, where Ian Lowe is managing director.
Well, Harlow Agricultural Merchants is a private limited company. It's owned by its staff and by a few farmer shareholders, and we're trading chemicals, seed, fertilizer and grain in this corner of England, in East Anglia really. And Harlow has always had an interest in new crops and new ventures. We've pioneered a number of new crops in England: sunflower, linseed, things like durum wheat we were the first people into. So it's not the first new crop we've gone into, though maybe the most challenging. The background to why we got into the hemp originally was coming across a horse product. Horse bedding was made from the hemp plant, and we saw this product and this intrigued us, and really that started a whole chain of events where we researched into the crop. Then leading on from that, obviously, we found out about textile use, about the interest from the paper industry as a raw material for the paper pulp trade. So one thing led to another.
Ian's company is so confident of hemp's future, it has invested over $1 million developing specialized technology to process this crop. After careful market research, they are convinced the world shortage of cannabis fiber will help them reap a handsome profit, despite the plant's cloudy legal status.
Obviously, the fact that the crop is a banned substance and you have to be licensed to grow it has made life more complicated this year. It's added the challenge to it, but it's also added a lot of headaches. I think if it wasn't an illegal crop, life would be much simpler.
The worldwide prohibition of cannabis began around the turn of this century in the United States, where hemp was already in decline as a farm crop. The age of steam had seen a fall in demand for hemp ropes and sails, and the tough fibre also resisted attempts at mechanized harvesting. But it was the growing hysteria about the use of the plant as a recreational drug that would ultimately seal its fate.
This harmless-looking cigarette is cloaked in many innocent disguises. But light the match, inhale the smoke, and it becomes an invitation to your own murder. This killer and the man who sells it has no respect for anybody.
The use of cannabis as a relaxant and mild intoxicant was not a new phenomenon. The practice has been traced back thousands of years to India, where hemp was revered as an aid to self-enlightenment. The custom spread through the Middle East and into Africa, from where the slave trade brought it to the Americas. By the turn of the century, Mexican immigrants were bringing the custom into the United States. They used the same plant American farmers grew by the ton, but smoking it was a foreign practice, which was regarded with suspicion and fear, fueled by ignorance. In 1914, El Paso, on the Mexican border, passed the first anti-marijuana laws in the United States. They were as much an excuse to crack down on the large number of Mexican immigrants as they were an attack on the drug itself. This period also saw the start of the temperance era, when drugs of all kinds were increasingly vilified, with alcohol as public enemy number one. A huge law enforcement bureaucracy was created to wage the war, but with little success. By the end of Prohibition in 1933, US lawmen and moral crusaders were looking for another scapegoat to blame for what they saw as the nation's moral and social decay. They found a new target in marijuana smoking. This is the man who did most to demonize cannabis, Commissioner Harry Anslinger, former Assistant Commissioner of Alcohol Prohibition, then head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics from 1930 to 1962.
Harry Anslinger was the single most important person in federal drug control policy in the United States. It was Anslinger more than any other individual who is responsible for the repressive, punitive nature of drug enforcement during the past half-century or so.
Anslinger campaigned hard for federal laws against cannabis. The laws guaranteed the continued existence of his Narcotics Bureau to police them.
Waiting in Washington are Narcotics Commissioner Anslinger and Coordinator Graves.
Great work, Grayson. Great work. Splendid. Goodbye. Well, I guess that cleans up New Orleans for a while.
That's swell, Harry.
Dr. John McWilliams spent 5 years researching a biography on Harry Anslinger. He believes Anslinger deliberately exploited public ignorance to preserve his bureaucratic empire.
Anslinger perpetuated much of the myth around marijuana, for example. He exaggerated the effects of marijuana, characterized it as a killer weed, in fact even referred to it as the assassin of youth, and claimed that it could lead the user to commit heinous violent acts and even lead to insanity.
The attacks on marijuana displayed a strong element of racism. They were anti-black and anti-Hispanic. In 1937, Anslinger told Congress that marijuana smoking was propagated by Negroes, Mexicans, and entertainers.
Victor Licata, the young Hispanic, was one of Anslinger's favorite stories from his, what I and others refer to as his gore file, that he used to impress congressional committees if there was any question about the deadly effects of marijuana. Licata, in 1933, as the caption reads, while under the influence of marijuana, murdered his mother, father, sister, and 2 brothers with an axe while they were asleep. And Anslinger was correct about his relating the story that Licata did murder his family with an axe, but he omitted the fact that Licata was suffering from mental illness and was later institutionalized.
The American tabloid press, particularly Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain, supported Anslinger's propaganda. In the company's own words, it crusaded unceasingly against the narcotic evil in all its vicious forms.
Anslinger began to demonize marijuana, recognized it as this evil drug to his way of thinking. Hearst picked up on this, published dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of lurid stories about marijuana and people who smoked marijuana committed these horrible, heinous acts while under the influence, allegedly, that fit very well with the sensationalistic nature of a lot of the Hearst newspapers when it was splashed across the front pages. And the public would read this, form their conclusions. They're very limited, with limited information about this drug, and that in fact supported Anslinger, and it was kind of a circular sort of nexus or relationship between Hearst and Anslinger.
In 1937, against the wishes of the American hemp industry and the medical profession, in convincing Congress to pass legislation that effectively outlawed the plant. Incorrectly classified as a narcotic, as dangerous as heroin and cocaine, hemp was condemned without any balanced study into its effects.
Well, probably science has always been manipulated. There were scientists who told us that cannabis caused people to kill in 1937. They were bad scientists. There are scientists who now tell us that cannabis causes changes in motivation, changes in brain function. They also are bad scientists because they have no proof, but they have sort of retrospective speculations. Identifying an individual who's been in trouble, who's had problems, and then discovering that individual was a cannabis user, and then engaging in this kind of foolish causal association. My son used to be a wonderful person, and then he smoked cannabis, and now he's failing school. It must be the cannabis. Wrong. It may not be the cannabis. He may be smoking cannabis because he fails school. He's unhappy. In fact, the studies in which we looked at long-term use of cannabis in a cohort of people, and then compared them to people in a culture who are not long-term cannabis users, has shown basically no difference in intellectual cognitive functioning.
Dr. John Morgan is a physician and clinical pharmacologist at the City University of New York Medical School. His specialty is the evaluation of illicit drugs, including marijuana.
I'm interested in marijuana toxicity because I would like to see the American people and others be able to think about the use of a substance that has some risks but still can be thought of in a rational, proper fashion instead of a evangelical, terrified one. I'm not interested, interestingly enough, in marijuana as a recreational drug because I'm not interested in my personal use of it, but all of these other things intrigue me.
Dr. Morgan points to a recent survey conducted by Harvard University of 1,000 leading U.S. cancer specialists.
They asked these specialists if they had heard of cannabis as an anti-nauseant, as a drug to prevent nausea and vomiting. They asked them if they had ever recommended it to their patients, and they asked them if they thought it should be available. The outcome was quite surprising, I think, to many people. Over half of those respondents stated that they would like cannabis to be available and that they would prescribe it to their patients if it were available. And furthermore, half of them said they had already recommended it to their patients. The American government has effectively prevented most research in terms of marijuana, particularly in hopes of finding a therapeutic application. One can get funding for marijuana research if one's interested in showing the drug is harmful. Then there's significant amounts of money available, and that constitutes most marijuana research in the United States. We're only beginning to try to obtain funding to do therapeutic marijuana trials.
We're talking about one of the most valuable medicines, natural plant medicines in the world, marijuana, good for glaucoma, epilepsy, asthma, menstrual cramps, insomnia, eating disorders, muscle spasms, and the pharmaceutical industry is allowed to run propaganda saying that it's no good. And no one is presenting the other side of the story. We're the only source of information about the benefits of the plant.
Steve Hagar is editor of High Times, the only magazine in the world devoted to challenging the conventional view of marijuana.
High Times is the front lines of the opposition against the drug war. And really what the government fears is the information about marijuana, the real information about it. To a certain extent, we do glorify the plant, but at the same time, we don't want to mislead people. Marijuana stimulates the learning and memory centers of your brain. It's a very sensitive part of your brain. It's not something I think children should be engaging in. Some people abuse marijuana. You know, if you wake up in the morning and the first thing you do is roll a marijuana cigarette and you smoke marijuana all day long, unless there's a real medical reason for you doing that, then that's abuse.
Perhaps the most important thing to talk about is that the drug can, as other drugs that enter the brain, affect behavior and reflex time and perception. It's a mild intoxicant, but an intoxicant nonetheless. So that an individual who ingests it may make mistakes. He may be clumsy. He probably should not drive a car, but they think it wrong, politically and morally, that hundreds of thousands of young people are arrested for marijuana possession, and I think the law is a greater danger to them than the dangers of the drug.
One of the few countries to challenge the prohibition of marijuana is the Netherlands. Here in Holland, the hemp fibre industry is being revived by the government, which has invested more than $15 million in researching non-drug varieties of hemp. It's no coincidence this policy came about in a country with Europe's most tolerant attitude to the recreational use of marijuana.
We cannot win the war on drugs, and we don't want to criminalize the uses of drugs, especially the uses of soft drugs. In Holland, we have seen no increase when we regulated soft drugs. So you have always to suspect politicians making too much a point of this drug issue.
Theo van der Werf is a senior agronomist with the Dutch Agricultural Technology Organization. He is among 40 scientists who have spent 3 years researching the viability of hemp as a solution to a number of problems caused by Holland's intensive agriculture.
Well, I'm very enthusiastic about hemp, because hemp is a little bit a crop which has been of declining importance for 200 or 300 years. It's very nice to be able to help a revival of such an old and useful crop. This is the seed, and it contains proteins and oil. Proteins can be used as a foodstuff for humans or animals. 1 month ago, I was in the Hemp Research Institute of the Ukraine, And my salad dressing was hemp oil. And it can be used as a dryer for making paint or things like that.
But the Dutch found hemp's greatest potential in paper making and have been testing the fibre using various pulping methods. In this process, the raw fibre is placed in a grinder where heat and pressure pulverise it into a fine pulp. The fibre is then mixed with water in this scaled-down demonstration of the paper-making process. As the water drains, the fibres coalesce, producing a sheet of hemp pulp. Anything made from wood pulp can be made from hemp, from cardboard to newspapers, from tissue to Bible paper. Holland recycles an impressive 70% of its waste paper, but the more paper is recycled, the weaker it becomes. The inherent strength of hemp fibre makes it an ideal pulp to reinforce recycled papers. It's a market niche worth billions of dollars annually. A sawmiller's daughter, Patsy Harmsen, also looks to hemp as a viable substitute for trees in paper making. She sees it as a potential saviour of Tasmania's fast disappearing old-growth forests.
When Dad went into the bush to get saw logs, everything was left intact. You couldn't tell where they'd been to get the logs, and the undergrowth thrived and the animals thrived, and there was very little disturbance. So the love of the forests was a very, very important starting point for me. And the next one was outrage when I realised that, in fact, wood wasn't the best material for making paper. It's certainly been turned into wonderful paper by people who've poured heaps of energy and heaps of chemicals into it, but it is not a natural fibre for paper. And the best natural fibres are, in fact, annual farm crops, and especially hemp and flax as well. I can't believe that anyone could ban a plant that's absolutely natural and wonderful and put here for everyone to use with thousands of uses.
With the harvest of their third experimental crop, Patsy is determined to prove hemp can be used as a replacement fibre in Tasmania's massive pulp industry. Harvest is a family day, with sons, daughters and friends all helping out. Despite the crop's negligible THC content, the drug squad insisted the flowering heads be destroyed for fear they might be passed off as high THC cannabis on the illegal market. Part of this crop is earmarked for the research laboratories of Australian newsprint mills, Australia's largest supplier of newsprint paper. A&M consumes over 500,000 tonnes of trees every year, but that's only a fraction of the 9 million tonnes felled in Australia annually for pulp and wood chips. In fact, the timber in this yard is only enough to fill Australia's newsprint needs for one day. With the controversy surrounding the logging of old-growth forests, A&M has recently moved to plantations for its fibre input. But pine and eucalypt pulps need a stronger fibre to reinforce them, and the company spends $20 million each year importing bales of craft pulp made from spruce trees.
This particular one's come from...
Len Johnson, A&M's technical manager, believes locally grown hemp may have the potential to replace this expensive import.
Fibres showing up here. Now, you have to add that to newsprint to make it strong enough to handle. Obviously, hemp can contribute to this sort of strength, although it would require some pretty special treatment, some special equipment. You know, it doesn't come cheap.
Well, originally we wanted to see hemp being able to replace all grades of paper, but really we have to be realistic, so we were wondering if it could start off an industry perhaps by replacing this very expensive craft softwood pulp because of its extremely long fibre and strength characteristics.
Believe me, it is possible, and this sort of material can be made, a material somewhat like this can be made from hemp, and it can be added to our pulp, and it would be an asset. And it would be an asset to Tasmania too, by the way, wouldn't it?
Oh, would.
Be a great boom.
While A&M has shown considerable interest in investigating hemp as an alternative to craft pulp, their research is still in its early stages. The short-term problem for hemp is that global prices for wood pulp are artificially low, making competition difficult.
Many forests are not grown sustainably, and well, it's a cheap way of cutting down natural forests and replacing them with nothing or with tree plantations, but it means that in fact the wood is too cheap, and the real environmental costs are not all in the price of pulp and wood. When you pulp hemp, you need less harmful chemicals to obtain a similar quality than with wood from trees. And I think the way to go forward is to market hemp products using these environmental advantages, trying to convince the consumer that paper made from hemp is worth more because it's less harmful.
That's exactly what English printer and papermaker Peter Messenger has done, opening up a booming market for his tree-free papers. Peter can't produce enough hemp paper to meet demand, but that's only because of a global shortage of cannabis fibre for pulping.
It took a little while to find a source of hemp pulp. There are very few sources available in the world, and it was only in the summer of '91 that we came across a source who agreed that they would supply us. Since then we've been making batches of 5 tons at a time, which have found a ready market. People have seen the quality of the paper that we're making, and from what I've seen and from what people have told me, it is the best hemp-based paper in the world at the moment. This year we have secured the sole agency for the UK hemp crop for paper, and we will hopefully be producing somewhere in the region of 2,000 tonnes of hemp-based paper.
Since 1990, Australia has imported over $1 billion worth of wood pulp and paper products every year. With the right development, many believe paper made from locally grown hemp could replace many of these imports. The state of Oregon in the northwestern United States is home to some of America's oldest redwood forests, as well as some of the country's biggest wood chip and fibre mills. Bill Condy owns the largest redwood lumberyard in the state. He is convinced of hemp's potential, not just for paper, but as a replacement for wood in the massive building industry.
We are in the lumber industry and have been for many years, and they are literally chewing up millions of acres of trees for the fiber content of the tree. And the major portion of the trees are actually used for fiber rather than for building materials. And we need to be able to replace trees with another product, with something that is sustainable. If we bring on hemp crop as a fiber crop and start growing it in the massive quantities that we need it, then the price of it will come down, and farmers will be able to sell it to the mills at a price that will be cheaper than wood. Just give it a couple of years, and the price of hemp will be cheaper than wood, because it's a 120-day crop as opposed to several hundred years. There's no comparison. It really isn't.
Bill's faith in the plant's future is backed up by these hemp particle boards produced for his company by the highly regarded Wood Products Division of Washington State University.
We made these boards, which are world-class, These are as good as anything that they make in any of the factories down here. And we have factories here in the state of Oregon. One, for instance, down south of here uses a little over 700 tons of fiber a day, and they sell $3 billion a year worth of this one product here. Now, one of the important things about this is that we have these factories that are set up all over the Pacific Northwest. Some of them cost $100 to $150 million to build. It's very important that we be able to continue to use this same technology. What we found by working with Washington State University is that not only does hemp work as a wood substitute and make these wonderful boards here that are just as good as anything made out of Douglas fir, and even better, is that using the exact same technology that's in place today. Washington State University used the exact same technology that they're using right now with wood chips, and it works. We have not only proven that hemp works, but we have contacted and have people that are in the industry that are willing to now use and would use hemp right now if we could get it to them. And we have customers that would buy the product. The whole thing is there. We need only one last part of the puzzle, and that is to be able to grow the hemp fiber here domestically so that we can supply the mills. And the truth of the matter is that's what we need to do worldwide. We need to grow hemp worldwide and to supply the fiber need of the planet through annual fiber crops rather than through cutting down hundreds of year-old trees.
Amongst the thousands of products made from hemp, one of the most extraordinary is Henry Ford's plastic car. Built in 1941, it contained cellulose fibers derived from hemp, sisal, and wheat straw. The plastic was lighter than steel, yet could withstand 10 times the impact without denting. Forgotten facts like these were revealed by Jack Herer in his landmark 1986 book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes. Today, Jack continues his passionate crusade, spreading the word of hemp's little-known benefits.
The hemp seed dissolves all the cholesterol or plaque in your arteries, and we made that illegal. That's what our smart politicians, now obviously they didn't know this information, because if they knew this information and made it illegal, then politicians would have to be jailed for being criminally insane.
Not many people in the world knew that hemp was marijuana. When I started out in 1973, it was the news to me. I'd heard that it had been called hemp, but I never really understood that. I never got any connotation in my mind that gave me pictures of what that meant. And hemp is always been marijuana. But when the government outlawed it, they didn't outlaw it as hemp. They outlawed it as marijuana, Mexican colloquialism, a slang, low-class word for marijuana, and they used that as an official English language word. And they didn't even tell the people they were outlawing hemp. It's legal in some of the countries to grow hemp for fiber. And in France, this woman whose name is France Perrier, Madame France Perrier, she builds about 300 houses a year using hemp and cement lime, and she makes a thing called isocyanure. And she mixes the lime with hemp hurds, the leftover parts of the hemp plant after the fiber's been extracted. And hemp does this amazing thing. It turns to stone, it petrifies. And so when you mix the lime and hemp hurds together, you get something stronger than cement at 1/6 the weight.
C'est-à-dire que dans un premier temps, j'ai cherché à pétrifier les végétaux, c'est-à-dire à minéraliser les sèves. Et puis ensuite, j'ai trouvé des archéologues qui m'ont dit avoir vu des sites mérovingiens et des sites égyptiens qui avaient été vraisemblablement faits de ces mêmes techniques.
Madame Perrier has had thousands of prospective orders for her houses from all over Europe. But like so many others, she is held back only by the restrictions on hemp production. But hemp for paper and building materials are just two aspects of the plant's rediscovered uses. They may not be haute couture, But all these clothes have been made from cannabis fibre, and it's in the fashion and textile markets that hemp is predicted to make a highly profitable comeback. These bales of hemp cloth are some of the first to be imported into Australia from China, one of the few countries still growing and weaving cannabis fabric on any scale.
So just make sure you match it with the right batch.
Hemp is many times harder wearing than the toughest denim, yet the fabric can be just as soft and comfortable as cotton.
Right, this is the new pattern block we've been working on, which is one of the things I wanted to discuss with you.
Along with Melbourne fashion label Slam, Andrew Catalaris has produced a range of hemp jeans and streetwear, the first step in satisfying a growing retail demand.
Well, this has been washed 123 times.
120?
123. And
when we tell people that it's sort of made out of cannabis, I mean, people have no idea that it was ever used for garments before. They think it's a completely new thing. So when you tell them it was, you know, that even Levi's were made all from cannabis originally, they usually got a fairly shocked reaction to it. It's got a huge potential because it can be used in really high quality designer garments, straight through to everyday garments as well, streetwear, day wear, everything.
We've had a really good response, and as far as selling, they're selling very well. I mean, I can't put it this way, we can't supply as much as we could sell.
In the sprawling plains of western New South Wales, Andrew Catalaris sees the potential for a hemp industry that could rival the massive cotton industry, which is beset with environmental problems. Andrew's views are backed up by Hans Waldring, a cotton grower and agronomist with Australia's largest agricultural consultancy.
We're pretty happy with our cotton gross margins. I mean, we know that.
Waldring estimates the gross margins of hemp could be 4 times greater than cotton.
I've spoken to a number of clients who are irrigators, broadacre irrigators, and they're pretty excited about it, really. We'll head out there tomorrow and we'll go and have a talk to a few of them and see what they think.
Good. Well, we've probably got the expertise to grow it really well. You know, we've got good gear and we're pretty efficient industry, all particularly the cotton grower, but not only cotton, soybeans and sorghum growers are all pretty efficient. I'd say it'd be quite a simple matter to grow the stuff. Yeah. I don't think you'd have any trouble getting blokes to switch. If you can sow the gross margin, say 3 or 4 times as much profit as cotton or soybeans, you would have no problems in getting people to grow it.
The cotton industry is one of the largest consumers of agricultural chemicals in the world. While cotton profits are volatile, strains on the environment are growing with each crop.
In terms of the pesticide issue, hemp will be of benefit. A lot of irrigated crops do have a fairly high dependence on chemicals, and hemp, it would appear, has a very low to nil requirement for chemicals, and a lot of farmers look forward to that, both from a reduction in cost aspect and also to reduce the chemical load on their farms and on the environment.
There are various reasons for the decline of the hemp industry, but the only good reason now that I can really think of, and it certainly isn't a good reason, but the only reason must be that there are various vested interests and industries that exist today that do not want to see the revival of a hemp industry because it competes. It's a natural. And the synthetic companies and the companies that are using non-renewable resources are not going to be too happy with that sort of competition.
Some speculate it was precisely these commercial fears, as well as the drug phobia, that saw the plant prohibited in the first place. By the mid-1930s, after years of decline, the cannabis industry was poised for a revival, with new machines that could make hemp production vastly more efficient. Popular Mechanics predicted that hemp could soon become a billion-dollar crop, providing thousands of jobs and supplying a vast range of products from dynamite to plastics.
We know that a machine was invented that was to hemp what the cotton gin was to cotton. Now, when the cotton gin was invented, cotton went from being the most expensive fiber in the world, worn by only rich people, to the cheapest fiber in the world, worn by everybody. Now, if a machine was invented that would have revolutionized hemp the way the cotton gin did the cotton, why is it that 2 months later that this plant is made illegal? And is there a connection between those two events?
Some believe there was a connection. At that time, the giant DuPont Chemical Corporation was doing big business selling chemicals to make paper from trees. It was also perfecting synthetics it hoped would make natural fibers redundant in textiles and cordage. Jack Herer argues that a revived hemp industry would have encroached on DuPont's potential profits.
DuPont came up with nylon, and nylon was going to be big. They were going to make everything out of it. They built it of synthetic hemp. It's synthetic linen. Anytime you wanted nylon, you had to go to DuPont. Anytime you wanted the plastic fiber, you had to go to DuPont. They had the hold on the world, and the world loved nylon.
Look what's here, girls. Nylon. Thousands of spools of nylon thread. You guessed it, all going into stockings. The knitters are running night and day. Gentlemen, have you ever seen a lovelier smile?
DuPont's commercial interests would not have been lost on Andrew Mellon, DuPont's banker and head of the Mellon Bank, America's fifth largest. Mellon had not only lent DuPont millions of dollars, he was also head of the U.S. Treasury. In that capacity, he had appointed J Anslinger as Federal Narcotics Commissioner, the man who campaigned hardest for national laws against hemp. As it happened, Mellon was more than Anslinger's boss. He was, in fact, family, because Anslinger had married his niece. This apparent convergence of interests cannot be proven, but it makes for interesting speculation.
DuPont, Harry Anslinger, and Andrew Mellon. I can't actually put them into the room saying, oh, here, let's have laws against marijuana. But you can't take men. If these men didn't know who their main competitor was, who could make no use for most of those chemicals that DuPont was making, if these men didn't know it, they would be ignorant. They would be so stupid, they'd be an embarrassment at any board meeting. So they did away with their competition, which was hemp.
Those who believe hemp's prohibition was partly driven by commercial interests point to the sudden about-face by the U.S. government just 5 years later. During the Second World War, with nylon manufacturing still in its infancy, America faced a desperate shortage of cordage. The government encouraged farmers to grow hemp, the same demon, marijuana, for the war effort.
Hemp for mooring ships, hemp for tackle and gear, thread for shoes for millions of American soldiers, and parachute webbing for our paratroopers. Hemp for victory.
By the end of the war, hemp was no longer needed as a strategic resource. Now, the military was called out against its former ally.
Marijuana is a weed and spreads like crabgrass once it goes to sea. But 3 Marines armed with flamethrowers live up to the Corps' boast. They have the situation well in hand.
Actions like these marked the beginning of the modern war on marijuana, a war J Anslinger took to the United Nations. As America's representative on the UN Drugs Committee, Anslinger initiated a series of conventions to prohibit the plant worldwide.
You know, you can't get government aid from the United States unless you have a plan in your country to eradicate hemp. You know, Bangladesh, bang means marijuana. That's what it means. Bangladesh means marijuana land people. We went there and destroyed all the hemp in Bangladesh. It was holding all those hillsides together. Suddenly there's massive flooding all over this country. You know, it's insane. It's like, it's a genocide war against a plant.
The prohibition of marijuana has made it more valuable per ounce than gold. It supports vast criminal empires and has made cannabis a multi-billion-dollar crop in the world economy for all the wrong reasons.
The whole movement would be overjoyed if we could separate non-THC hemp from marijuana as a separate issue. And they won't let us do that. They won't, and the United States government won't recognize that you can grow this plant without any drug. And so we can have paper made out of hemp, and we can have clothes made out of hemp, and we can produce it all here in this country. And the farmers can make the money, and we can have a whole industry based around hemp. And it won't have any THC, won't have any recreational drug use whatsoever. But they won't let us make that separation. And I believe that's why, that's the evidence that the THC is just the smokescreen. And it's the hemp that they're really concerned about.
We haven't seen anybody yet come up with an answer to the forest crisis that says, here's the way to solve the problem. One group says, stop cutting the trees. The other group says, let us take them all down. And the in-between is, trees are fiber, hemp is fiber. It's as simple as that. Hemp is a far superior fiber.
I believe if the end uses for hemp, which are the paper, the fibre and the ethanol end uses, are successfully commercialised, I think we could see hemp as a billion-dollar crop for the turn of the century for Australia.
Next Sunday in True Stories, we use the latest psychiatric methods to delve inside the mind and motives of Adolf Hitler. How did he manipulate the media and public opinion? And what inspired the devotion of millions of Germans? Find out in Führer, Seduction of a Nation, next Sunday night at 8:30. Coming up, the conclusion of Thicker Than Water.
Diamant, een robijn, een saffier, 2 smaragden, een tourmalijn